Welcome to those of you here today. I'm Gareth. I'm the Member Services Manager from the ACEVO team, and it's a pleasure to welcome you all today to this session on engaging volunteers to meet your fundraising targets. Sam from Rosterfy will be guiding us through this picture, exploring volunteering in the donor picture at present, and looking at how volunteers can help you and your organisation in impacting your fundraising targets. So it's an absolute pleasure to welcome Sam today, and welcome Rosterfy, who are a trusted partner of ACEVO. And he can explain to you a little bit more about the picture at the moment and a little bit more about the work that Rosterfy can do to benefit your organisation. So Sam, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to you, and the show is in your hands, sir.
Thanks very much, Gareth. Lovely to meet you all. I don't think I've met too many on this call, so it's good to be part of this session. As Gareth said, we have partnered with ACEVO over the last year, so we have put out some blog content together, and we've got some upcoming webinars as well that are always free to attend. So at the end, I'll try and share the link to that as more than welcome for any of your team members that want to join some of these sessions in future. I'll just share my screen to make sure that you can all see it. So give me 2 seconds to do that. We do have plenty of time as well baked in for this session for questions, so feel free to drop questions into the chat as and when we run through the session. Also, I'll allocate some time at the end for some questions as well if you wanted to go through it. So just to introduce myself, my name is Sam Bennett. I am the sales lead for a company called Rosterfy in the UK and Europe. I will do a brief introduction as to who Rosterfy are in just a second, but we do come from all things volunteering based. So we are a volunteer management software platform, and live and breathe volunteering, and have done for the last 10 years or so across about 35 different countries. For today's session, I will be going through a bit of an overview of the volunteering and donor landscape. As Gareth mentioned, this is a session that's all around fundraising and volunteering and how we can better tie the two together. And a lot of that, the big theme of today's session is going to be about supporter experience. So we'll go through some industry statistics and trends that we're seeing, but really it's all about giving every single person that comes through to your website, puts their hand up and says they want to support your charity. Usually they'll have a personal connection to your cause, and it's about giving them a good experience, but also telling them how they can make a difference and how they can benefit your charity. So we'll go through some of that experience piece and how that can unlock the different sort of values of volunteering. I'll talk today a little bit about the lifetime value of a volunteer. You might be quite familiar with the phrase of kind of calculating volunteering hours and actually the value of the work that they're doing, but I'm actually not referring to that. I'm talking about how do we keep volunteers engaged for the long term, and once someone has come and helped out with your program once, how do we make it easy for them to support the charity in lots of different ways in the coming years and decades to come. I will throw in 3 or 4 sort of case study stories throughout the session as well. So I think we've got some QR codes to some areas in our website and some proven customer stories that I can talk to as well, and some good examples of things that we've seen that have worked really well. And then really talking about, once we've got that volunteer supporter experience right, how do we then expand your volunteering offering into new markets? So thinking about new demographics that you'd like to engage with in your communities. That might be local universities, colleges, schools, corporate businesses, local community centres, city programs as well. So a wide mix of different volunteering communities are potentially out there in your local areas, but it's about getting that volunteer experience right to begin with, and then looking about how we can target some of those different demographics and widen the pool of volunteers in our base. So just a quick introduction to Rosterfy. The mission statement for Rosterfy as a company has always been connecting communities to events and causes that they're passionate about through volunteering. So we started about 10 years ago. We were actually originally basically a staffing agency. So we were connecting young people coming out of colleges, coming out of universities, with local work experience opportunities for local charities, local fundraising events, local sports events in their area as well. So that grew to a size where we had lots of different young people who we'd onboarded, screened, kept informed about opportunities in their area, helped them to build out their CV, and had placed them with lots of different partner organizations. And what basically happened was a couple of the co-founders of Rosterfy built their own database to manage that cohort of volunteers, and the kind of people that they were placing into those different partner organizations. And organically over time, that platform that they were using to onboard and keep those volunteers engaged and report on the hours and the work that they were doing gathered a lot of interest. So in its own right, organically, the Rosterfy database that was being used became kind of the point of interest, and we kind of became a software company organically as partner organizations started to use the platform that we'd built in-house. So here we are 10 years later. We've operated volunteer programs now in 35 different countries across 15 languages. We're very proud to have gone past the 100 million volunteering hours mark powered in the Rosterfy platform this year. And we're already setting our sights on 1 billion as we bring some more programs, some large programs onto the platform in the coming couple of years as well. We are a pledge 1% supplier. So we do like to give back to our communities, and very much so our employees are out in the communities themselves, volunteering with a mix of different organizations so that we can get hands-on experience and learn from what makes a good volunteering experience as well. I won't labor on this too much, but just quickly on Rosterfy, we were founded out of Melbourne in Australia. So we have got a couple of offices down in Australia still. I'm talking to you from our London Bridge office, which is where we support all of our European customers. So Europe is actually the biggest region for Rosterfy in terms of the biggest customer pool. And we work predominantly with charities in the UK space, as well as local cities and governments, and a mix of different event orgs as well. We also have a couple of offices placed across the US. So we are across all of the different time zones and support a real wide mix of different volunteering programs across the globe. We do also have around about 3.5 million volunteers now actively using the platform worldwide. So we've got a lot of data and a lot of knowledge when it comes to different volunteering schemes and what might make a good experience for a volunteer. Just a few names that we work with there. I will share the slide deck after this session, but also, as I said, there are a number of case studies and examples that we're running on our website at the moment. We are also running a webinar series, as I mentioned at the start. So we do have some of these customers coming on board to talk about some of their experience. We've got a podcast and a webinar where we talk about different examples. So do feel free to go and check those out as well. But as you can see on the screen at the moment, these are some of the charities that we work with, particularly in the UK. So there's a wide mix of different charity programs of all kinds of different shapes and sizes. And yeah, some really good stories and examples of things that are going well in the volunteering space in the UK. Enough about Rosterfy as an introduction. So we'll focus on the topic of today's session. So we're going to talk about the volunteering landscape. It probably won't be a huge surprise to a lot of those on the call that we have in the last few years seen an increased demand for charity services, particularly in the UK, as we've had the cost of living crisis. We've had gaps in public sector funding, and therefore, a lot of the time charities are being asked to pick up the slack and support their communities. And at the same time as that, because of some of those same factors, we're actually seeing a smaller pool of volunteers. So whilst charities are seeing an increase in demand for their services, we're seeing 24% fewer volunteers than in the previous 3 years. So it's a huge drop off in terms of volunteer numbers. And again, some of the factors that are around the drive for increase in demand of the charity services are the same reason for why volunteers are dropping off as well, in the sense of cost of living crisis, people coming back to work from COVID, having less time to support from a volunteering perspective, and needing to find more paid work employment as well. So there's a good competition out there at the moment. There's a demand for services, you need support, but it's about how do we get more people through those funnels, and that's a big part of what we're going to be talking about today. Fundraising and volunteering, as you'll see in this session, there's a lot of overlap, there's a lot of interlink. Quite often volunteers will donate and fundraise. Quite often donors will also volunteer and donate some of their time. So some of the trends that you see in the volunteering space are very, very tightly interlinked with donations. So actually we are seeing less people donating to charities as well. Certainly that's the trend that's been over the last sort of decade or so, particularly with the lowest giving group being the young people that are coming through. So that 16 to 24 age group is the lowest in terms of fundraising and donating that's been going on. So donations have actually increased in terms of monetary value, but the number of people who are donating to charities is falling. So that's an important trend to keep an eye on, and ways that we need to try and circumnavigate that and find ways to connect people to the different initiatives that you're running at the moment. So just going through, we've done a couple of webinars recently with some fundraising platforms like Give and Gain as well. And there's a great report out there that I'd encourage you to go and look at from last year called the UK Giving Report, which was run by Charities Aid Foundation. And there's some really interesting statistics in that. So One of them was around, why do people donate? How do they get connected to the cause? And you can see on the chart there that 60% of people that donate to a charity will do so either through personal experience or through their friends and family. So there is a big word of mouth element there. The third biggest one is obviously social media, which kind of leads on to the same point. Quite often, the people that are donating to a charity or volunteering their time to a charity are doing so because they have some form of personal connection to the end cause that you are serving. So whether that's a certain illness group or a certain demographic that's struggling in their local community, quite often people will feel connected to the work that you're doing. And it's about, how do we make sure that when someone puts their hand up to support your organization, we give them the best possible experience and find ways for them to help in flexible kind of ways. So we'll go through. I'll kind of drop in a few questions. I'm not asking for answers from the audience right this moment, but just some things to think about as we go through this session. So, do you feel that you have an understanding at the moment of a direct and indirect impact that your volunteers have on your fundraising outcomes? I will talk about a couple of case studies in our customer base where maybe you've got kind of a siloed organization. Quite often, you can have the people department in an organization, the fundraising department, the donations, the volunteering kind of areas of the organization. They can all be different teams, maybe even in different locations, run by different people in different ways, and that can be quite siloed and disjointed. What we'll see in this presentation is there is an awful lot of overlap between funders, donors, and volunteers, and it's important to have a joined up supporter experience where you can make it easy and flexible for a volunteer to donate or a volunteer to run a marathon for you, and likewise for your donors and your funders to come and volunteer for your program. So it's about connecting up the dots, sharing the data across the organization, and making sure that we don't have any wastage. So have a think about that at the moment in terms of your experience and the way that your organization is set up. Are you a little bit guilty of having those different silos, or do you really feel that you're well connected across the charity at the moment and you can see your data across the org? One statistic that really always jumps out, well, there's a couple actually. One is that 85% of volunteers will donate to the charity that they volunteer with. The second one is that generally volunteers will donate more money than those that don't. It makes a lot of sense because obviously these volunteers are people that are on the ground, they are giving their time, they are seeing the end impact that your charity is having. Quite often they could be out in the community offering support, or they're kind of hearing more from you about your newsletters and getting involved with some of your briefing sessions. They're understanding and seeing the work that your charity is doing. They're seeing the difference that is being made, and therefore they are the best people to go out and advocate for your charity, but also to donate as well, because they feel connected to your cause and want to give more and help out more. So again, it's really important that we join up the dots across the organization, see data across a broad lens within the charity, but from an experience point of view, make it really easy for one person, one supporter to donate to that organization in lots of different ways across a period of time. Just to re-emphasize that point, there's an 87% overlap of volunteer support and donations. So again, it's quite rare for someone just to come and donate or just to volunteer. Quite often they're doing a mix of both. And it is, again, a kind of a goal really that you need to have to be able to join up that data and that experience. So when I've asked this question before, we've kind of gone to a lot of conferences and events over the years, and there's not really an industry kind of benchmark in the volunteering space in the UK. But quite often, what charities have done in the past is they've looked to, calculate what's the minimum salary, wage in the UK, and therefore how many volunteers have we had this year, and how many hours have they donated, and that's the value of volunteering. So that's been the kind of traditional way of analyzing kind of the value of a volunteer and calculating that, and that's still a valuable metric and can still allow you to calculate how many volunteers you need to support your different initiatives. But what I'm looking at today is really how we as Rosterfy, I've come from a sales background. We've got Claudia on the call today as well, who's from a marketing background. The way that we think about going out to acquire and find and engage with new potential customers is, what is their lifetime value? So ultimately at Rosterfy, we are looking for organizations who we know will use our system every day, get lots of value out of the product, and get basically customers that are going to stick with us for the long term because they see the value immediately. So we think very hard about what is the ideal customer for Rosterfy, what makes them such a good customer, what other customers do we have that are very similar to them already, and what kind of stories can we surface to go and engage. So, speaking to the likes of yourselves, we're speaking to more charities in the UK because we've got lots of great stories and customers that are using the platform every day and getting a lot of value out of it, and we want to find more of them. We think that you can do the exact same thing when thinking about your volunteer program. So stop and think about what makes a good volunteer, what demographics tend to be really good to engage with, understand their motivations for why they wanted to volunteer with you. Are they getting that out of their volunteer experience? So are you running kind of surveys and pulse surveys and getting feedback from volunteers around why did you originally kind of reach out to us? How did you hear about the charity? And are you actually getting from your volunteer experience what you were hoping to get initially? We know from doing a lot of our surveys that different demographics of volunteer have different reasons for wanting to volunteer. So for example, young people, typically their main motivation is to build out their CV and grow some experience, whereas over 60s, they tend to want to give back to their communities and make friends within their area. So again, think about when you're posting roles to talk to those different messaging, really understand what kind of demographics you want to engage with. And then therefore, when you're posting roles, when you're onboarding volunteers, recruiting volunteers, and having volunteers come and help, think about how you can surface information to make sure that they really understand why they're helping and they're getting the value out of your program that they hope to be getting. What that can then do is it can help those people to feel connected to your cause. So if I'm, for example, volunteering in a retail store for a charity, or I'm coming to an event and doing a couple of events a year where I'm donating some hours of my time, think about how you can surface that story up to the volunteer to explain the difference that they're making. And that's where retention becomes very important. It's not just, oh, you've done 8 hours in a retail store, thank you very much. What do those 8 hours mean? Is it that it's a fundraising event and you're earning X amount of money and therefore that money is able to be deployed to help service people in the community? Think about what difference that volunteering is making. And if you can surface that up effectively to your volunteers and continue to engage them in that, they will understand the difference that they're making and also feel more connected to your organization. And as we said, 85% of volunteers will donate to the charity that they volunteer with. And this report here from the giving report that I mentioned earlier shows that last year in the UK, 75% of people, and that's the population as a whole, 75% of the UK population in the last 12 months, so between 2023 and 2024, did something charitable. And on that graphic there, you can see the different ways that people might be able to help. So in the long term, you might have people that donate some of their time. They might be donating clothes. They might be getting people to sign up to a raffle. They might be running a marathon. They could be sponsoring someone that's running a marathon. There's all kinds of different ways that people can volunteer. And you'll also have these super givers in the middle that do a mix of all of these things. The reality is, as people grow up and go through different life cycles, they might have time to volunteer one year, then they get life experience, life circumstances change, they have a family, they move away, they have a new employment opportunity, they might not have time to volunteer anymore. But if you're able to connect up the organization, you can find other ways that they can help. So whether it's that, again, they can donate money, they might be able to sign a petition, donate clothes, make it really flexible for them to still be able to support the organization, even if they can't do it in the same way that they have done typically. So it's really about how do we just join up that experience and allow it, volunteers to support in lots of different ways. Be interested to know from the audience how well you feel you're allowing people to flow through those different departments at the moment. So there's a few ways that we do it typically. We can track where volunteers are coming from when they're signing up, and we can also track, where they go on in terms of once they've signed up through your website, how many of them actively go on to volunteer, and plugging into the different fundraising databases that you might have in your ecosystem, we can also see whether they've donated money long term. So the idea is if you're able to engage people through the website and give them a good experience at the beginning, you will avoid people dropping out early on. If I apply through your website and I don't hear anything for 2 weeks, I might then disappear and go and volunteer with a different charity, and I might then not be able to unlock this lifetime value that we're seeing on screen. So it's about making sure when someone puts their hand up to come through your website, even if you don't have a volunteering role available for them right now, find something for them to do, show them ways that they can help, and keep them engaged long term so that they can support your organization in different ways. So in terms of just some ways that we can help with some of this, and we'll come on to some case studies in just a second, but One of the ways that we do it is when we're recruiting, being able to track your different recruiting sources. So I've had organizations recently who have come to me, not Rosterfy customers, but ones that we're speaking to, where they have quite siloed departments across the organization. So they gave me one example. I'm not going to name them, obviously, but quite a big UK nationwide charity. They were saying that they ran a big recruitment campaign for their fundraising events, volunteers. So they did a lot of spend. They were advertising roles in Indeed. They were going out to market. They were putting QR codes out everywhere. They were engaging university fairs. They needed 300 fundraising volunteers. They had around about 1,000 applicants. And what basically happened was they had enough to fill in their 300 vacancies. The rest of the volunteers who had applied kind of just got left on the shelf. Because the organization was quite disjointed, it meant that those extra 600 people that had applied weren't being put through to other teams. They weren't being shared across the organization. So essentially they were spending money on recruitment campaigns. They were spending money on putting the word out there, putting adverts out there, putting postings on Indeed, getting lots of people, a surplus of applicants coming through. And those applicants could have supported other areas within the organization, but they didn't because it was one department running one recruitment campaign and there was no joined up data. So it's about being able to join up the data from a recruitment standpoint across the org and being able to see where your volunteers are coming from. So if you are posting at a university fair, if you are engaging with local corporates, being able to see how many have signed up from each of those sources. And also, not only have they signed up, but how many of them actively went on to volunteer later down the line with you from those sources as well. That helps you understand your data. So quite often charities that we work with will have volunteer programs where you have to do a mix of different screening steps, recruitment steps, so things like training, references, interviews, waiver forms that have to be signed, background checks. It can be quite cumbersome to come and give your time for free. So it's thinking about how do we look at that data? We understand how many people have applied to volunteer and also understanding how many have made it through each of your checkpoints. So that will help you to understand where your volunteers are dropping out in that process. So for example, if you're being a bit too slow with your background checks, or you're a bit too slow to respond when someone's submitting a reference form, you might get people that just get frustrated or just go and disappear and go and help somewhere else. So it's about how do we look at that data, understand where people are dropping out in the process, and how do we speed it up? How do we give them more communications? How do we support them? Or if they've got a really kind of lengthy onboarding process, could we invite them to a welcome session, a briefing session whilst their application process is going through? Could we find ways to be able to speak to them and get them engaged with some things, some lighter activities, so that they're less likely to drop out in the process? And we've got some great customer stories of organizations that have done that. That really leads on to the same point around communication. So when someone applies, making sure that they've received timely communications from you, and throughout the process, they understand what opportunities are open to them and what they're going to be needing to do and ways that they can support your organization. People want to help, but they need to be told how they can help and what would be most useful. And then lastly, I mentioned it, but data integration. So if you have a HR database, if you have a fundraising database already, what can typically happen is you might have volunteer records in one of those databases, but then you've got a heap of different operational things that are happening outside of those databases. So as I say, you might have one team onboarding volunteers on spreadsheets, you might have another team using an LMS, you might have a rota system over here, you might have someone sending out forms over there. So those different kind of operational processes that sit outside of your HR and fundraising systems means that you've now got no visibility of what's going on with those volunteer applications, and it's not updating those central systems. So what we do at Rosterfy is we have that end-to-end recruitment and onboarding experience in one place and integrate it with the fundraising system so that you've got a live data view of each of your volunteers that come through the process. So a few case studies. The biggest one that we've worked with now for a number of years is British Heart Foundation. The biggest kind of statistic for me from their case study, so they've used Rosterfy for just over 2 years, is actually not on this slide, but it is on the case study on our website. It really is that previously, before they were using Rosterfy, they had 700 retail stores, hundreds, if not thousands, of fundraising events across the country, a wide mix of different volunteering roles. All of them were doing things in different ways. So when it came to recruiting volunteers, they had a Blackboard fundraising database where volunteer records were stored, but they also had a heap of paper forms, Excel sheets, and a wide mix of different systems to onboard and recruit those volunteers. They think that previously their volunteer conversion rate which is basically a statistic that says how many volunteers went from applying with British Heart Foundation to actively helping in a volunteer role. Previously, they think it was about 10%, i.e. 90% of the people that came through their volunteering website were dropping out at some point in the process and never actually ended up helping. So if you think back to that slide that I showed around the lifetime value, if you've got 90% of people dropping out, those 90% are never going to go on to support the organization with the fundraising initiatives in the future. They might not donate clothes to the charity stores. You're losing out on that whole lifetime value because of that initial experience not being a great one. With Rosterfy, we've been able to work on streamlining their process. So we've more than halved the amount of time it takes to onboard their volunteers. Communications are way more timely and quick and engaging throughout the process. And the volunteers have a self-serve portal where they can see where they're at in the different recruitment processes that they're currently in. The result of that is they've been able to quadruple their volunteer conversion rate. So whereas before they had 90% of their volunteers dropping out, now their conversion rate is around about 40%. So now it's only 60% of volunteers dropping out. So if you think that they're now getting 4 times as many volunteers from the same number of applicants, and again, if you think about that from a lifetime value point of view, every single year, they've got 4 times as many active volunteers engaging with their organization. And at each point, those volunteers can go on to do multiple fundraising and donating initiatives in the future as well. So all of that has been realized, as well as the 125% increase in volunteers helping with multiple roles. So as I said, it's about how to join up the teams, join up the processes. And instead of having those paper forms and spreadsheets in different areas, we've now got a process where those volunteers can sign up with different roles throughout their life cycle with British Heart Foundation. Some of the other stats on there are just around the admin time saves in terms of the time it takes for the volunteer team to actually handle those recruitments and applications. So we've been able to streamline a lot of that, which helps their program to scale and helps them to engage volunteers in new areas. Another really good example of the silos, we started working a similar time, actually 2-3 years ago, with Child Bereavement UK. They brought us on originally to work with their volunteers for their fundraising events. So again, it was one kind of department within the organization that was looking for a system to help them engage their fundraising event volunteers a bit better. When they started onboarding it, Lorna, who was their kind of head of volunteer experience at the time, she realized that actually they could use this across the organization. So they've got a mix of different roles, and you think child bereavement is a really, really sensitive topic. So those volunteers that are helping to support the families with bereaved children, they need a lot of screening, they need a lot of hand-holding, they need training to set them up for success, and they need ongoing support, because quite a lot of the time this is quite, there's a real mental toll with supporting some of these families. So what they've been able to do again is join up the organization, really tell their story across the org, and have volunteering roles in different departments. And again, if you have a surplus of volunteers in one department, could they be redeployed elsewhere? And that's what Child Bereavement have done. They've taken one unified approach to volunteering across their org, which has seen great results with volunteers being able to move freely across the organization, and the admin times having more time to support those volunteers who most need it. My last example, and there's a mix of case studies on the website, so feel free to go and have a look at some of these. This is a more recent customer with WaterAid. So we started working with them specifically this year for their fundraising volunteers that go to their festivals. So festivals like Boomtown, Glastonbury, those big summer festivals that we have in the UK, they have volunteers that will go out and talk about WaterAid and the work that they're doing and the impacts of having clean and accessible water to different people around the planet. So yeah, they've been able to engage their volunteers that bit better. One thing that they put in, which was a big admin burden for them this past year, was actually being able to connect volunteering with fundraising directly. So take Glastonbury, for example. Glastonbury tickets are like gold dust. Everyone wants Glastonbury tickets. So what they do for their Glastonbury volunteers is they will take a deposit. So if you sign up to volunteer with WaterAid at Glastonbury, you will get to go to the festival. You will get to see a couple of days of music as well as volunteering with them, but you do have to submit a deposit through, so that you're basically paying for the value of the ticket when you first sign up. At the end of that process, we've got an integration now with Stripe, where volunteers can submit their deposit during their sign-up process. And then at the end of Glastonbury, the volunteers are then asked, would you like to donate some of that deposit back to WaterAid? So just from, I think they had 5 or 6 festivals on Rosterfy this summer with 730 volunteers. This is one small pocket of WaterAid. You know, there's a much bigger organisation and volunteers in different areas, but just in that one small pocket, they collected £20,000 of volunteers just from their 730 volunteers that came to help across the summer this year. So yeah, really, really powerful, and just shows that, again, just by having those volunteers who are really connected to the cause, they really understand the story, and they've been advocating for the charity, they're much more likely to donate and actually give more money as well to that cause. So a lot of talking from me. I'm keen to hear to see if there's any kind of questions on this session in just a moment, but just thinking about what opportunities you see for better integrating volunteers into your fundraising strategy. So I guess a couple of things. I will just go back to some of these slides, but just some kind of key points to think about when you're looking at the volunteer program. So understanding what role do volunteers currently play in your organization. Are they tied at all to your fundraising goals? Are you able to calculate the return on investment of volunteers? And as I said, think about that lifetime value. Is there a way that you can track the journey of a volunteer and see whether they've been able to, volunteer and donate money at different times? And then using that data to then shape your future fundraising strategy. So as, again, which demographics do you want to reach out to? Which ones make the best volunteers? And once you've created that nice volunteer experience and used that data to get more people through that funnel and actively helping, that's when you can go back and then look at which other demographics could you go and engage with. So we're seeing a lot of our customers now really latch on to corporate volunteering. Very, very common now that most companies in the UK will have some form of volunteering giving back scheme with their employees. So we see a lot of big companies in the UK who might have 2, 3, 5 volunteering days a year for each of their employees. So it's really important to take advantage of some of that. And not only are we seeing people that are having corporates come and volunteer, but we're also seeing the corporates themselves wanting to donate and fundraise as part of that giving back initiative. So there is a screenshot on screen from British Heart Foundation where they have created Operation Elf. That is their Christmas campaign. So obviously we all know that BHF have lots of different retail stores on every high street across the country. What they've been able to do and with this offering is create a shortened onboarding recruitment experience specifically designed for corporates. So they can send out invite links to corporates with the corporate company's logo on, allow their volunteers to sign up, so the employees of that corporate to sign up. The corporates themselves can schedule multiple people into a volunteering day or event collectively. So we could say, for example, 20 people from our team are going to come and take over and support these 2 stores in our local area today. They'll have a simplified onboarding experience. And what BHF are seeing is that actually those corporates are willing to donate money to BHF as well. So one of the organizations, and obviously I'm not going to name them, but they were saying they would give £100 per volunteer that came to volunteer for the day with BHF. So again, opening up that experience, finding ways to track the data. And of course, what corporates want to hear is the volunteering hours that their employees have given, and also the difference that it's made. So where we've seen real success with this in the past is, again, as I mentioned at the start, it's not just 8 hours in a retail store. Those 8 hours with 20 volunteers have enabled us to do Y. So there was a great example within our customer base for the Common Good, who are actually a hospital based down in I think it's in Melbourne in Australia. And they were saying that from their corporate volunteering programs, one of their corporates gave enough volunteering hours for them to be able to fundraise and buy 2 life-saving support machines. So at the end of the year, they were able to go back to the corporate and say, hey, your volunteering hours have enabled us to buy these machines, which have enabled us to save X amount of lives. So it's really bringing to life the reason and the meaning behind the volunteering hours, and it's not just hours that are being donated. So that was more or less it in terms of my a lot of words from me there. Obviously, with the volunteer experience, we have in the last year actually released our new mobile application. So we do now have the ability as well for volunteers to log in their mobile app and toggle between the different charities that they might volunteer with. So if they support local organisations all in the same area, they can sign up to opportunities and complete their onboarding and recruitment steps all in one place, as well as sign up to shifts. The next phase of that mobile app will be to enable volunteers to actually just search for opportunities in their area via the Rosterfy app. So obviously anyone can download Rosterfy. I could just be a volunteer looking for opportunities. So we are looking to, as phase 2 of that app launch, enable people to post public roles in the Rosterfy app for people to go and sign up to, which will be a nice additional recruitment window. So that's really helped us with the experience. It's engaging young volunteers coming out of university and college, but also with elderly demographics. We're seeing great uptake as well, as a lot of the time elderly volunteers do not have laptops and computers, and a lot of them these days are using smartphones and tablets. That was most of the talking from me. I guess just to summarize, this is kind of the end-to-end Rosterfy solution, and we are running a series at the moment where we've just chunked down that whole presentation into bite-sized content. So we're doing sort of 15, 20-minute webinars that are all free to attend, from awareness and finding more volunteers of different demographics at the start of the process, through to creating that great onboarding and recruitment experience, through to scheduling them and actually collecting their volunteering hours, and then retainment and reward and recognition and insights as well. So we are running a full series with lots of different customer stories packed into them as well. So I would encourage you to come and get involved with those and check them out if this topic is interesting to you. I've also got my LinkedIn page and my email address on screen at the moment, but that's the end of kind of the content I was going to run through today, but I'm very keen to spend some time now answering questions